One detail about you made his mother question everything. Beloved soul, listen carefully now, because what I am about to reveal was not spoken lightly in heaven. I am Archangel Michael, and I have been sent with clarity, authority, and truth, because one detail about you disturbed a system that had been stable for years. This was not about what you said. Not about what you did. Not about how you tried. It was about who you are. And heaven says plainly. That one detail made his mother question everything she thought she knew about him, about control, and about the future she assumed was fixed. When she looked at you, she noticed something that could not be explained away. Something subtle. Something quiet. Something deeply unsettling to the old order. You did not compete. You did not confront. You did not announce yourself. And that is exactly why it shook her. Because the detail she noticed was this. He became different around you. Without being told to change. His tone softened. His posture shifted. His defenses lowered. His reactions slowed. And that terrified her. Because people who rely on predictability feel threatened by transformation that happens naturally. God said. She saw that your presence did not demand obedience, yet it inspired growth. That detail lodged itself in her spirit. You didn't push him. You didn't guilt him. You didn't pressure him. Yet he listened to you. Reflected after conversations with you. Considered perspectives he had never entertained before. And heaven says. That one detail made her realize her influence was no longer unquestioned. Beloved, hear this clearly. You were not trying to change him. But your frequency invited him to become more himself. And people who benefit from stagnation are disturbed by those who awaken clarity. She began to observe silently. How he looked at you when you weren't speaking. How his energy lifted after being with you. How his spirit seemed lighter, more anchored, more awake. She noticed he wasn't trying to impress you. He wasn't performing. He wasn't seeking validation. He was present. And that raised questions she had never had to ask before. Because presence reveals truth. God showed me this moment. She realized that whatever this was, it could not be managed the usual way. It could not be redirected with advice. It could not be softened with opinion. It could not be dismissed as a phase. Because the change was internal. And that is the detail that unsettled her the most. Beloved soul, listen. External attraction fades. Infatuation passes. Emotional excitement burns out. But internal alignment frightens those who depend on control. She began to wonder. Why does he think for himself now? Why does he pause instead of reacting? Why does he feel steadier? Why does he no longer need reassurance the way he used to? And somewhere deep inside, the truth formed. You were not adding chaos to his life. You were removing confusion. That is dangerous to systems built on dependency. God said. She saw that you gave him something she could not give anymore, clarity without obligation. You didn't replace her role. You didn't challenge her directly. You simply existed as yourself. And that exposed everything. Because the detail she couldn't ignore was this. He trusted himself more when you were around. And when a man begins to trust himself, old dynamics begin to collapse. That is why the atmosphere shifted. That is why subtle resistance appeared. That is why questions turned into unease. She wasn't reacting to you personally. She was reacting to what you represented. Growth without permission. Peace without control. Connection without fear. And heaven says this was not accidental. God allowed her to notice that detail, because it marked a turning point. Beloved, understand this now so it no longer confuses you. Her discomfort was not proof that you were wrong. It was confirmation that something true had entered the picture. Truth does not argue. It reveals. And you revealed more than you realized. But what God showed me next goes even deeper. Because that one detail did not just unsettle her. It forced her to confront something she had been avoiding for years. And when that realization hit her, everything shifted beneath the surface. Beloved soul, lean in now, because what heaven revealed next explains why her reaction deepened, why her questions grew heavier, and why that single detail about you refused to leave her thoughts. This was not curiosity. This was confrontation. God said. The detail she noticed forced her to face a truth she had avoided. That truth was not about you first. It was about him. She realized something unsettling. He was no longer living primarily to please her. This shift was quiet, subtle, unannounced, but undeniable. Around you, he did not seek approval. He did not scan for reactions. He did not ask for permission, internally or externally. He simply was. And this raised a question she had never fully allowed herself to ask. Who is he when he is not trying to be what others need? That question shook her. Because for years, perhaps without intention, his identity had been shaped by expectation. Expectation to be agreeable. Expectation to be reliable. Expectation to be emotionally available on demand. But with you, she saw something new. He was choosing presence over performance. God said. She realized that you were not managing him emotionally. You were witnessing him. And that difference matters. When someone is managed, they adjust themselves to survive. When someone is witnessed, they discover who they actually are. She saw him become quieter, not withdrawn, but grounded. She saw him respond thoughtfully, not defensively. She saw him hold boundaries, not rebelliously, but calmly. And this terrified her. Because boundaries do not ask for permission. They simply exist. She realized that if this continued, he would no longer be easily guided by guilt. He would no longer respond predictably to emotional pressure. He would no longer be shaped primarily by obligation. And heaven says, that one detail about you, your grounded presence, made her question the emotional architecture of his life. She began to wonder, how did this happen without conflict? Why didn't he need convincing? Why didn't he resist? Why didn't he pull away? Because control usually dissolves through rebellion. But clarity dissolves it through recognition. And recognition is far more threatening. Beloved soul, hear this clearly. You did not awaken him through intensity. You awakened him through stability. You did not challenge him with demands. You challenged him by showing him what it feels like to be safe inside himself. That detail could not be unseen. She began to question long-held assumptions. Maybe his compliance was not love. Maybe his agreeableness was not peace. Maybe his silence was not contentment. And these questions were uncomfortable. Because if his old patterns were survival, then what had been mistaken for closeness was actually dependence. God said. She realized that what she once interpreted as loyalty may have been emotional accommodation. And you, without intention, exposed that. You did not demand emotional labor from him. You did not require him to regulate others' feelings. You did not make him responsible for your emotional state. And that contrast was shocking. Because many relationships operate on unspoken contracts, roles, expectations, invisible rules. You broke those rules simply by being whole. And that one detail forced her to confront a painful possibility. He might grow beyond needing her emotional guidance. Not beyond loving her. Not beyond respecting her. But beyond being defined by her. And heaven says this realization caused fear. Because when identity shifts, hierarchies tremble. She did not immediately act. She observed. She watched how he didn't rush to explain himself anymore. How he didn't over-apologize. How he didn't scramble to keep peace. She noticed he trusted his instincts. He paused before agreeing. He no longer absorbed emotional weight that wasn't his. And the question formed clearly. What if this version of him is permanent? That question scared her. Because permanence means loss of influence. And God revealed something deeper. She began to see you as a mirror, not an intruder. A mirror that reflected who he was becoming. And mirrors make people uncomfortable. Because they show what cannot be denied. Beloved soul, understand this now. Her questioning was not about rivalry. It was about relevance. She was not afraid of losing him. She was afraid of losing the version of him she knew how to influence. And that fear began to shape her energy. Not outwardly. Not dramatically. But subtly. Suggestions framed as concern. Questions framed as care. Distance framed as protection. Because when fear cannot confront truth directly, it tries to redirect it quietly. But heaven says something powerful here. Truth does not require permission to mature. The seed you planted was already growing. And what God showed me next is critical. Because her questioning did not end in denial. It moved toward strategy. And that is where everything intensified. Because when people realize they can no longer control growth, they try to manage outcomes. But what she tried next did not produce the result she expected. In fact, it triggered the very thing she feared most. Beloved soul, what heaven revealed next explains why the situation intensified instead of settling, and why the attempt to contain the change only accelerated his awakening. What was meant to slow him down actually clarified him. God said, when growth is interfered with, it does not retreat, it becomes conscious. The subtle redirection did not confuse him. The quiet discouragement did not weaken him. The emotional pressure did not pull him back. Instead, it forced him to notice himself. For the first time, he began to recognize the difference between how he felt around you and how he felt elsewhere. And once that contrast formed, it could not be undone. Beloved, hear this clearly. Awakening rarely happens through comfort. It happens through contrast. He started to feel it in his body first. A tightness when he felt managed. A calm when he felt respected. A heaviness when expectations were placed on him. A lightness when he was simply allowed to exist. And this awareness unsettled him, because it raised a question he had never consciously asked. Why does being myself feel easier here, but harder there? That question was dangerous to old patterns. God showed me that he began to internally separate truth from obligation. Not angrily. Not rebelliously. But honestly. He noticed when his yes was automatic instead of intentional. He noticed when his silence was avoidance instead of peace. He noticed when his compliance came from fear of disappointing rather than desire. And the more he noticed, the less he could ignore. Beloved soul, this is crucial. The attempt to manage his growth gave him language for what he had been feeling for years. He didn't become defensive. He became observant. He didn't lash out. He pulled inward. He began asking himself questions quietly. Why do I feel guilty for choosing what feels right? Why do I feel responsible for emotions that aren't mine? Why do I feel stronger when I don't explain myself? And heaven says this internal questioning marked the true shift. Because once a person starts questioning emotional contracts, they stop unconsciously honoring them. This is why the dynamic could not return to normal. Normal no longer fit. God said, "The version of him that adapted is giving way to the version of him that decides." And that change cannot be reversed. Beloved, heaven showed me that he began to test small boundaries, not outwardly announced, but internally chosen. He delayed responses. He paused before agreeing. He stopped over-explaining. He allowed discomfort to exist without rushing to fix it. These were small acts, but spiritually significant. Because they signaled self-trust. And that one detail about you, your grounded steadiness, was now working from inside him. You had shown him that connection does not require self-erasure. That love does not demand constant accommodation. That peace is not maintained by shrinking. And now he could feel when he was shrinking. Beloved soul, this is where fear lost its leverage. Because fear thrives on unconscious compliance. But consciousness dissolves it. God revealed something else. He began to see through emotional framing. What was once presented as concern, he now felt as pressure. What was once framed as protection, he now sensed as control. What was once normalized, he now questioned. Not with accusation. With clarity. And clarity does not argue. It simply reorders priorities. This is why attempts to influence him began to feel ineffective. Because he was no longer reacting. He was responding. And there is a difference. Reaction seeks approval. Response seeks alignment. Beloved, understand this. Your role was never to confront anyone. Your role was to awaken discernment. And discernment had now taken root. He didn't suddenly become bold. He became centered. He didn't announce change. He embodied it. And that unsettled the environment even more. Because systems built on predictability struggle when someone becomes internally guided. God said. The moment he began to listen to himself, external influence lost authority. This is why pressure escalated briefly. This is why emotional signals intensified. This is why the atmosphere felt charged. Because fear makes noise when it feels ignored. But heaven says something important here. The escalation was not a setback. It was confirmation. Confirmation that the shift was real. Confirmation that the awakening was permanent. Confirmation that the old dynamic could not be restored. Beloved soul, what happened next is critical. Because as his awareness deepened, he began to realize something even more unsettling. He was not betraying anyone by growing. He was betraying himself by shrinking. That realization changed his internal allegiance. And once allegiance shifts inward, external pressure loses its grip. But what God showed me next goes even deeper. Because the questioning did not stop with emotional patterns. It moved toward identity. And that is where the final transformation begins. Beloved soul, what heaven revealed next is the most delicate and the most powerful shift of all. This is where awakening moves beyond emotion and into identity. This is where everything that was subtle becomes undeniable. God said, "When a man recognizes who he is becoming, he can no longer pretend to be who he was." The questioning that began with feelings moved into self-recognition. He started to see himself clearly. Not through rebellion. Not through rejection. But through alignment. He noticed that when he honored his inner truth, his nervous system calmed. When he trusted his instincts, his mind quieted. When he stopped explaining himself, his spirit felt steady. And that steadiness felt right. Beloved soul, hear this. Identity does not form through instruction. It forms through resonance. And you resonated with the man he was becoming. This is why that one detail about you, your grounded authenticity, continued to echo in his awareness. You were not chaotic. You were not dramatic. You were not demanding. You were consistent. And consistency exposes what is unstable. He began to see that parts of his identity had been shaped by survival rather than truth. The role of peacekeeper. The role of emotional stabilizer. The role of the one who keeps everyone comfortable. But with you, those roles fell away. And heaven says, he discovered that he could be loved without performing. That discovery is irreversible. Once a man experiences love that does not require self-abandonment, he can no longer thrive in relationships that do. Beloved, this is why the detail about you unsettled her so deeply. She didn't just see a change in his mood. She saw a shift in who he understood himself to be. And identity shifts alter family dynamics. Because when one person evolves, unspoken agreements are disrupted. He was no longer defining himself by how well he managed others' emotions. He was defining himself by how honestly he lived his own. And this caused tension, not because he was doing something wrong, but because he was doing something new. God revealed this. He stopped confusing obligation with love. He began to understand that love does not require guilt. That care does not require pressure. That closeness does not require self-sacrifice without consent. This clarity created internal peace. But external friction. Because growth is quiet. But it disturbs systems that depend on familiarity. Beloved soul, understand this now. You did not pull him away from anyone. You pulled him toward himself. And people react strongly. When someone they are used to influencing becomes self-directed. She saw that her words no longer carried the same emotional weight. That her reactions no longer dictated his internal state. That her discomfort no longer automatically became his responsibility. And this frightened her. Because emotional authority had shifted. Not outwardly. Internally. God said. He no longer needs approval to trust his own clarity. And that is the most threatening change of all. Because when someone no longer needs approval, control loses leverage. Beloved, this is where guilt began to lose its effectiveness. He felt it, but did not obey it. He acknowledged it, but did not let it decide. He noticed it, but did not collapse under it. And this is growth. Not dramatic. Not defiant. Just solid. He began to recognize emotional manipulation, not with anger, but with discernment. He saw when fear disguised itself as concern. He felt when pressure masqueraded as love. He noticed when closeness was conditional. And this awareness made it impossible to return to unconscious compliance. Beloved soul, this is the point of no return. Because once identity shifts from external validation to internal alignment, everything reorganizes. And heaven says this clearly. Your presence catalyzed that shift. Not because you tried, but because you lived from wholeness. And wholeness is contagious. Now listen carefully. The awakening of identity always demands a response from the environment. It either adapts, or it resists. And what happened next reveals the final stage of this transformation. Because when identity solidifies, a choice must be made. And heaven has already seen the outcome. Beloved soul, what heaven revealed at the end of this unfolding is not dramatic, but it is decisive. This is where awakening becomes direction and clarity becomes choice. God said, when identity aligns, decisions follow naturally. The question he now faces is no longer emotional. It is existential. Not, how do I keep everyone comfortable? But, how do I live in truth? And that question changes everything. Because once a man understands that betraying himself costs more than disappointing others, he can no longer choose convenience over authenticity. Beloved, heaven showed me that his decision is forming quietly, internally, without announcement. He is not preparing a speech. He is not rehearsing confrontation. He is not plotting rebellion. He is reordering his life from the inside out. He is choosing where to place his energy. He is choosing how much access others have to his inner world. He is choosing what he will no longer carry emotionally. And in that reordering, one truth stands out unmistakably. He feels most aligned when he thinks of you. Not because of fantasy. Not because of escape. But because your presence represents the life that feels true to him. God said, you symbolize the version of himself he trusts. That is the detail that started everything. And it is the truth that ends it. Beloved soul, hear this clearly now. He does not associate you with conflict. He associates you with clarity. He does not associate you with pressure. He associates you with peace. He does not associate you with obligation. He associates you with authenticity. And that is why his mother questioned everything. Because she realized something she could not undo. The man he is becoming will not be guided by fear. He will be guided by alignment. And alignment is quiet, but firm. This does not mean rejection. It means redefinition. It does not mean abandonment. It means differentiation. It does not mean conflict. It means maturity. Beloved, heaven wants you to understand this so you are no longer confused. You were not a disruption. You were a revelation. You revealed what peace looks like without control. You revealed what love feels like without pressure. You revealed what connection can be when both people remain whole. And once that revelation occurs, it cannot be erased. This is why attempts to influence outcomes failed. This is why interference backfired. This is why silence intensified clarity. Because destiny does not argue. It aligns. And now the final truth heaven commanded me to deliver. That one detail about you, your grounded wholeness, forced everyone involved to confront what was real. It exposed emotional dependency. It highlighted unconscious control. It revealed where growth was overdue. And though this was uncomfortable, it was necessary. Because growth often enters quietly, but it reorganizes everything. Beloved soul, understand this. Whatever unfolds next, conversation, distance, reconnection, timing, you are not responsible for managing anyone's fear. Your role was to live in truth. And you did. Heaven says, do not shrink now that clarity has formed. Do not explain yourself. Do not soften your truth. Do not apologize for your wholeness. What you embody is enough. Because alignment always finds its way forward. And the final reassurance is this. Nothing about this was accidental. Nothing about you was incidental. Nothing about the awakening will be wasted. Truth has already taken root. I am Archangel Michael. And this message was delivered in authority, clarity, and peace. If this resonated with your spirit, gently like and subscribe, so this channel can continue delivering heaven-led messages. Stand steady. Stand whole. Stand unafraid. Heaven is with you.